You're not stuck because you're lazy. You're not behind because you lack talent. You're stuck because you keep looking at other people's lives and measuring yourself against them. And every time you do that, you lose a little bit of yourself. Pause for a second and be honest with yourself. How many times have you opened your phone just to check something quickly and ended up scrolling for 30 minutes, seeing someone your age making more money, someone building something bigger, someone living a life that looks better than yours? And in that moment, something shifts inside you. You don't feel inspired. You don't feel motivated. You feel behind. You feel small. You feel like you're not doing enough. So you tell yourself, I need to work harder. I need to catch up. I need to become more. But what if I told you that's not the real problem? What if the reason you feel stuck isn't because you're not doing enough, but because you're looking in the wrong direction? There was a time in my life when I didn't realize this. I thought comparison was normal. I thought it was useful. I thought looking at other people would push me forward. So I did it every day. I watched what they were doing. I followed their progress. I compared their results to mine. And slowly, without even noticing, something started to break. I stopped trusting my own path. I stopped listening to my own thoughts. I started chasing things, not because I wanted them, but because I saw someone else achieve them. And the worst part, from the outside, nothing looked wrong. But inside, I felt lost. No clarity, no direction, just noise. Constant noise. And that's when I realized something most people never realize. Comparison doesn't motivate you. It disconnects you. It pulls your attention away from your own life and locks it onto someone else's. It makes you forget who you are, what you want, and where you're actually going. And the more you do it, the harder it becomes to come back to yourself. Because now, your identity isn't built on your own choices anymore. It's built on reactions. Reactions to what you see. Reactions to what others are doing. Reactions to a life that isn't even yours. And here's the dangerous truth. Comparison isn't just stealing your joy. It's stealing your potential. Because you cannot build a powerful life while constantly watching someone else live theirs. You cannot create something meaningful if your mind is always somewhere else. You cannot become who you are meant to be if you keep trying to measure yourself against people who are on a completely different path. So the question isn't, why am I not successful yet? The real question is, how much of my life have I wasted, looking sideways instead of forward? Because once you see it, you can't unsee it. And once you understand it, everything starts to change. In the next few minutes, I'm going to show you exactly what happened when I stopped comparing. What changed in my mind, what changed in my habits, and what changed in my life. Not theory, not motivation, real shifts, real actions, real results. And more importantly, I'm going to show you how to do the same. Because this isn't about becoming better than other people. This is about finally becoming who you are supposed to be before the noise got in. So take a breath and ask yourself one simple question. What would your life look like if you stopped comparing, starting today? Chapter 1. You're addicted to other people's lives. Let me tell you something uncomfortable. You don't just compare sometimes. You've been trained to do it, conditioned, rewired. And now, it feels normal. It starts small. You open your phone, just for a second. No intention, no purpose, just a quick check. And then suddenly, you're inside someone else's life. You see what they're building, what they're achieving, how fast they're moving. And without even realizing it, your mind starts doing something automatic. It measures where they are versus where you are, what they have versus what you don't. And in that silent comparison, you lose. Not because they're better, but because You just shifted your focus away from your own life. I didn't notice this at first either. I thought I was just staying informed, staying motivated. I told myself it was useful to see what others were doing. But if I'm honest, I wasn't learning. I was watching. And there's a big difference. Learning gives you direction. Watching gives you distraction. And I was distracted all the time. I would start my day with a plan. Clear goals. Clear intention. But then I'd check my phone. And suddenly, my mind wasn't mine anymore. Now I was thinking about someone else's progress, someone else's success, someone else's timeline. And that's when something dangerous started happening. I stopped moving forward, not physically, not obviously, but internally. Because every time I saw someone ahead of me, I didn't feel focused. I felt behind. And when you feel behind, you don't act with clarity. You act with pressure. You rush. You doubt. You hesitate. You start questioning your path. Am I doing the right thing? Should I be doing what they're doing? Am I wasting my time? And just like that, you're no longer building your life. You're reacting to theirs. That's the trap. It doesn't feel like addiction, because there's no substance, no obvious damage, but it's there. You reach for your phone without thinking. You scroll without intention. You compare without awareness. And each time you do it, you reinforce the habit. You train your brain to look outward instead of inward, and over time, that becomes your default. You stop asking, "What do I want?" And you start asking, "What are they doing?" That shift is subtle, but it changes everything. Because the moment your focus leaves your own path, your progress slows down, not because you're incapable, but because your attention is divided. And attention is everything. Where your attention goes, your life follows. If your attention is constantly on other people, your life will always feel like it's falling behind. Not because it is, but because you're not fully present in it. I remember one specific moment. I was sitting at my desk, laptop open, work in front of me. But I couldn't focus, not because the work was hard, but because my mind was somewhere else. Earlier that day, I had seen someone my age talking about their success. More money, more progress, more recognition. And even though I didn't want to admit it, it got to me. I kept thinking about it, replaying it, comparing. And the more I did that, the less I could do my own work. That's when it hit me. I wasn't stuck because I lacked discipline. I was stuck because I was distracted by lives that weren't mine. And in that moment, everything became clear. You don't need more motivation. You need less exposure, less noise, less comparison, less input that has nothing to do with your path. Because you cannot build something meaningful while constantly observing someone else build theirs. It doesn't work. Your brain doesn't have unlimited focus. Every time you give attention to someone else's life, you take it away from your own. And if you keep doing that, day after day, you will feel stuck, not because you're not moving, but because you're not moving with full focus. And here's something even deeper that I didn't understand back then. Comparison doesn't just steal your focus. It reshapes your standards. The more you look at others, the more your brain starts to believe that their life is the baseline. Their success becomes the expectation. Their speed becomes the standard. Their results become the measurement. And suddenly, your own progress doesn't feel like progress anymore. Even when you're improving, it doesn't feel like enough. Even when you're moving forward, it feels slow. Even when you're doing well, it feels average. That's how dangerous this is. It disconnects you from your own reality. It makes you blind to your own growth. And once that happens, you lose motivation completely. Because why would you feel proud if your mind is always telling you someone else is doing better? This is why so many people quit. Not because they failed, but because they felt like they were failing. And those are two completely different things. So here's where it starts. Not with motivation, not with discipline, with awareness. Today, just observe. Every time you catch yourself comparing, pause. Don't judge it. Don't fight it. Just notice it. When does it happen? What triggered it? How does it make you feel? Because once you see the pattern, you break the illusion. And once the illusion breaks, you can take control back. And here's the truth you need to remember moving forward. You are not behind. You are not late. You are just distracted. Distracted by people who are on a completely different path, a different timeline, a different life. And the moment you bring your attention back to yourself, everything starts to change. Your clarity comes back. Your energy comes back. Your direction comes back. Because now you're finally building something that is yours. This is the first step. Not becoming better, but becoming aware of what's been quietly holding you back. Because the truth is simple. You can't build your life while watching someone else's. And until you stop doing that, nothing else will change. Chapter 2. Comparison is silent self-sabotage. The most dangerous habits are the ones that don't feel dangerous. They don't hit you all at once. They don't break you overnight. They work slowly, quietly, almost invisibly. Comparison is one of them. Because when you compare yourself to someone else, nothing dramatic happens in that moment. You don't collapse. You don't fail instantly. You just feel something small, a slight drop in confidence, a quiet sense of not being enough, and then you move on. But what you don't realize is that moment doesn't disappear. It stays. It sits in the background of your mind, and it starts shaping how you see yourself. Every comparison leaves a mark. Every time you look at someone else and think, they're ahead of me, you're also saying something else, without realizing it. I'm behind. And the more you repeat that, the more your brain starts to believe it. Not as a thought, but as a fact. And once something feels like a fact, it changes how you act. You hesitate more. You doubt more. You second-guess your decisions. Not because you suddenly became weaker, but because your internal standard has shifted. You're no longer measuring your progress based on where you were yesterday. You're measuring it based on where someone else is today. And that's a game you can't win, because there will always be someone ahead, someone faster, someone better in some way. If your sense of worth depends on that, you will always feel like you're losing. This is how comparison becomes self-sabotage. Not in a loud, obvious way, but in a quiet, consistent one. It chips away at your confidence, not all at once, but piece by piece, until one day, you don't trust yourself anymore. You don't trust your ideas. You don't trust your pace. You don't trust your path. And when you don't trust yourself, you stop taking action. You overthink. You wait. You delay. You tell yourself you're preparing. But in reality, you're hesitating. Because deep down, you don't believe you're ready. And that belief didn't come from nowhere. It came from every moment you told yourself someone else was doing better. I remember when this became real for me. I had ideas, plans, things I wanted to build, but I kept holding back. Not because I didn't know what to do, but because I kept seeing people who were already ahead. People who had more experience, more results, more recognition. And instead of taking that as proof that it was possible, I took it as proof that I was too late. So I waited. I told myself, I'll start when I'm more ready. I'll start when I know more. I'll start when I'm better. But that moment never came. Because the more I compared, the further ready felt. That's the trap. Comparison doesn't push your starting point forward. It keeps moving it away. No matter how much you improve, it never feels like enough. Because your reference point is always shifting. And when your reference point keeps moving, you never feel complete. You never feel confident. You never feel ready. So you stay stuck, not because you can't move, but because you've convinced yourself you shouldn't. That's what silent self-sabotage looks like. It doesn't look like failure. It looks like waiting. It looks like hesitation. It looks like perfectionism. It looks like telling yourself you just need a little more time. But the truth is, you don't need more time. You need to stop measuring yourself against people who are not you. Because every time you do that, you distort reality. You ignore your own progress. You ignore your own effort. And you replace it with a version of success that was never meant for you. So let me ask you something honestly. How many times have you delayed something? Not because you weren't capable, but because you felt like you weren't there yet. How many times have you doubted yourself? Not because you failed, but because someone else seemed ahead. That's not a lack of ability. That's comparison doing its job. And it's doing it perfectly, because it doesn't stop you directly. It convinces you to stop yourself. That's why it's so dangerous. No one forces you to quit. No one tells you to give up. You just slowly stop showing up the same way. You lose intensity, you lose belief, and eventually you lose momentum. All because of something that never actually had anything to do with you. So here's where the shift begins. Not by trying to become more confident, not by trying to force motivation, but by questioning the pattern. The next time you catch yourself comparing, pause and ask yourself one simple question. Is this helping me or hurting me? Be honest. Is it pushing you forward, or is it making you hesitate? Is it giving you clarity, or is it creating doubt? Because once you see what it's actually doing, it loses its power. And in that moment, you have a choice. You can keep feeding the habit, or you can take your focus back to your work, back to your path, back to your own life. Because that's the only place where real progress happens. Not in someone else's timeline, but in your own. And the moment you understand that, you stop sabotaging yourself quietly, and you start moving forward with clarity again. Chapter 3. The moment I lost myself. There's a moment that doesn't feel dramatic when it happens. No loud failure. No obvious breakdown. Just a quiet shift. So subtle, you don't even notice it at first, but that moment changes everything. For me, it wasn't a single event. It was a series of small decisions, small compromises, small adjustments, all influenced by one thing, what other people were doing. At the beginning, it felt harmless. I would see someone succeed and think, that's interesting. Then I'd start paying attention. What are they doing? How are they doing it? What path did they take? And slowly, I started to adjust my own direction, not based on what I truly wanted, but based on what I saw working for them. It didn't feel wrong. In fact, it felt smart. It felt like I was learning, adapting, improving. But there was something I didn't realize at the time. I wasn't building my life anymore. I was editing it to fit what I thought success should look like. And the more I did that, the further I moved away from myself. I remember one specific moment that made everything clear. I was working on something I had chosen, a goal I thought I wanted. But as I sat there, trying to focus, something felt off. There was no energy, no excitement, just pressure and confusion. So I stopped for a second and asked myself a simple question. Do I actually want this? And the answer was uncomfortable. I didn't know. Not because the goal was unclear, but because I couldn't separate my desire from what I had absorbed from others. That's when it hit me. I hadn't been making decisions based on who I was. I had been making decisions based on what I saw, and those are not the same thing at all. When you compare long enough, you stop trusting your own voice because your mind is filled with other people's opinions, other people's standards, other people's definitions of success. And when that happens, your inner direction disappears. You don't know what you want anymore. You only know what looks good. And that's a dangerous place to be, because you can spend years chasing things that were never meant for you. You can build a life that looks successful, but feels empty. I started noticing it more clearly after that. Every decision I made had a hidden question behind it. Is this what I want? Or is this what I think I should want? And the scary part was, I couldn't always tell the difference. Because comparison doesn't just influence your actions, it reshapes your identity. It changes what you value, what you prioritize, what you believe matters, without you even realizing it. And once that happens, you don't just lose clarity, you lose yourself. That's what I felt in that moment. Not failure, not weakness, loss, a quiet internal loss. Like I had drifted so far from who I actually was that I didn't even know how to come back. And that feeling is heavier than failure. Because when you fail, at least you know what you were trying to do. But when you're lost, you don't even know where you're going or why. That's when I understood something that changed everything. Comparison doesn't just distract you. It replaces you. It replaces your thoughts, your goals, your identity with something external, something borrowed, something that was never truly yours. And the longer you stay in that state, the harder it becomes to break out of it. Because now, you're not just comparing, you're depending on comparison to tell you what matters, to tell you what to chase, to tell you who you should become. And that's when you lose control completely. So I had to stop. Not gradually, not partially, completely. I had to disconnect from everything that was shaping my thinking from the outside. Not forever, but long enough to hear my own voice again. And at first, it was uncomfortable. There was silence. No input, no updates, no constant stream of information. Just me and my thoughts. And that silence felt strange, because I wasn't used to it. I was used to noise, used to distraction, used to comparison. So when that disappeared, I felt empty. But that emptiness wasn't a problem. It was space, space I hadn't had in a long time. Space to think, space to reflect, space to reconnect. And slowly, something started to come back. Clarity, not all at once, but in small moments, small realizations, small truths. Like, I don't actually want that. I don't care about that. That's not my path. And for the first time in a long time, those thoughts felt real, not influenced, not filtered, just honest. That's when I realized something powerful. You don't find yourself by adding more. You find yourself by removing what isn't you. And comparison adds a lot of things that aren't you. Other people's expectations, other people's timelines, other people's definitions of success. So when you remove comparison, you don't lose direction, you reveal it. Not sure, but only if you're willing to sit in that silence long enough. Because the truth is, you already know more than you think. You already feel what's right and what isn't. But you've been overriding it, ignoring it, replacing it with noise, with comparison, with everything except yourself. So here's where your shift begins. Not by trying to become someone new, but by asking one question and answering it honestly. What do I want if no one is watching? No audience, no validation, no comparison. Just you. Because that answer is where your real life starts. And until you face it, you'll keep building something that looks right but never feels right. And that's how people lose years. Not by failing, but by following a path that was never theirs. Chapter 4. Social media is training you to feel inferior. You think you're just using it. Just scrolling, just watching, just passing time. But what if that's not true? What if it's using you? Not in an obvious way, not in a way you can easily see, but in a subtle, consistent, psychological way. Because every time you open your phone, you are stepping into an environment that was not designed for your growth. It was designed for your attention, and attention is currency. The longer you stay, the more valuable you are. So everything you see is optimized for one thing: to keep you there. And the easiest way to keep you there is to make you feel something: excitement, curiosity, desire, and sometimes insecurity. Because insecurity keeps you watching. If you feel like you're behind, you scroll more. If you feel like you're not enough, you consume more. If you feel like you need to improve, you stay longer, and the system knows that. So it shows you people winning, people succeeding, people living better lives. Not the full story, just the highlight, the best angles, the best moments, the best results. And your brain doesn't process it as content. It processes it as reality. So now, you're comparing your everyday life to someone else's curated peak. And of course, you feel inferior. Not because you are, but because you're seeing an illusion and treating it like the truth. That's the trap. And the worst part? You don't even realize it's happening. Because it feels normal. Everyone does it. Everyone scrolls. Everyone compares. So you think, this is just how life is. But it's not. It's how you've been conditioned to experience life. I didn't see this clearly at first either. I just thought I needed to manage my time better, be more disciplined, be more focused. But no matter how hard I tried, I kept falling back into the same pattern. Check phone, scroll, compare, feel behind, repeat. And it didn't matter how motivated I was. Because I was constantly feeding my mind with things that made me feel like I wasn't enough. That's when I started paying attention. Not to what I was doing, but to what I was consuming, and what I noticed changed everything. The more I consumed, the worse I felt. The more I watched others, the less I trusted myself. The more I scrolled, the less I acted. That's when I realized something important. This wasn't a discipline problem. It was an input problem. Because your mind is shaped by what you feed it. And if you constantly feed it images of people doing better, it will start to believe that you're doing worse, even if you're not, even if you're improving, even if you're on the right path. That perception becomes your reality, and once that happens, your behavior follows. You hesitate more, you doubt more, you overthink more. Not because your life changed, but because your perception of your life did. That's how powerful this is. So I made a decision. Not a dramatic one, not a permanent one. Just a simple shift. I stopped consuming so much. I didn't delete everything. I didn't disappear completely. But I became intentional. I unfollowed accounts that made me feel behind. I reduced the time I spent scrolling. I created space. And at first, it felt strange, almost uncomfortable, like I was missing something, like I was disconnected. But what I was actually experiencing was withdrawal. Not from the app, from the stimulation, from the constant comparison, from the endless stream of other people's lives. And once that started to fade, something unexpected happened. My mind became quieter. Not empty, just clear. I wasn't constantly thinking about what others were doing. I wasn't measuring myself every few minutes. I wasn't reacting all the time. And in that quiet, I started to think again. Not about them. About me, my work, my goals, my direction. And for the first time in a long time, it felt enough. Not perfect, not complete, but enough to move forward. That's when I understood something most people never realize. You don't need more confidence. You need fewer triggers. You don't need more motivation. You need less noise. Because when you remove the constant comparison, you don't suddenly become better. You just stop feeling worse. And that alone changes everything. So here's something simple you can do. Not extreme, not unrealistic, just intentional. Look at what you consume. Not once, not casually, carefully. Ask yourself, how do I feel after I see this? Not what you think, not what you tell yourself, what you actually feel. Do you feel focused or distracted? Do you feel clear or pressured? Do you feel motivated or behind? Because your feelings are telling you the truth. And if something consistently makes you feel worse, it's not helping you, no matter how inspiring it looks. So remove it, reduce it, limit it, not because it's bad, but because it's not serving you. Because at the end of the day, you don't need to see everything. You need to build something, and you can't do that if your mind is constantly filled with lives that aren't yours. So take your attention back. Protect it. Guard it. Because once you do, you'll realize something powerful. You are never behind. You are just overwhelmed by too many directions that weren't yours. And when those directions disappear, your own path becomes clear again. Chapter 5. The day I disappeared. There was a moment where I realized nothing was going to change unless I did something uncomfortable. Not another strategy, not another plan, a decision, a real one. Because I had already tried everything else. More discipline, more motivation, more effort, and none of it worked. Not long term, because every time I tried to focus, something pulled me back. Not physically, mentally, back into other people's lives, back into comparison, back into noise. So I asked myself a simple question. What would happen if I just disappeared? Not from life, from everything that was distracting me, from the constant updates, the endless scrolling, the habit of watching instead of building, and the answer was uncomfortable. Because deep down, I knew exactly what would happen. I would be alone, no stimulation, no constant input, no distraction, just me. And that scared me more than anything else. Not because I couldn't handle being alone, but because I wasn't used to hearing my own thoughts anymore. That's when I knew this was exactly what I needed. So I did it. Not dramatically. Not for attention. Quietly. I stopped checking what everyone else was doing. I stopped following updates that had nothing to do with my life. I stopped giving my attention away to things that didn't move me forward. And at first, it felt wrong. Like I was missing out. Like something important was happening without me. Like I was falling behind. That feeling was strong. Because for so long, I had been conditioned to believe that staying connected meant staying relevant. But that wasn't true. What I was actually doing before was staying distracted. And now that the distraction was gone, I had to face something real. Silence. No noise. No comparison. No external input. Just space. And in that space, something strange happened. At first, my mind resisted. It wanted stimulation. It wanted something to react to. It kept reaching for my phone, out of habit, not need. But every time I stopped myself, that urge got weaker. The silence got stronger, not louder, deeper. And in that depth, I started noticing things I hadn't noticed before. My thoughts became clearer. Not because I added anything, but because I removed everything that wasn't mine. I started to see how much of my thinking was influenced, how many of my ideas weren't really mine, how many of my goals were shaped by what I had been consuming every day. And without that constant input, those influences started to fade, slowly, but noticeably. And for the first time in a long time, I felt something I hadn't felt in months. Clarity, not perfect clarity, not instant answers, but direction, a quiet sense of, this is what matters. This is what I want. This is where I should focus. And that feeling was stronger than any motivation I had before. Because it wasn't forced. It wasn't reactive. It was real. That's when I understood something powerful. You don't need more information. You need less interference. Because most of the confusion in your life is not coming from a lack of knowledge. It's coming from too much noise, too many opinions, too many examples, too many directions. And when all of that disappears, you don't feel lost. You feel focused, but only if you stay in that space long enough. Because here's the truth most people avoid. The beginning of clarity feels like emptiness. It feels like you don't know what you're doing. It feels like you're disconnected. It feels like you're missing something. And that's why most people go back to scrolling, back to comparing, back to noise. Because silence feels uncomfortable. But that discomfort is where your real life starts. That's where your real thoughts exist. That's where your real direction begins. So I stayed there. Even when it felt boring, even when it felt slow, even when it felt like nothing was happening. Because something was happening. Internally. I was rebuilding my attention, reclaiming it, taking it back from everything that had been pulling it away. And once that started to happen, everything else became easier. Focusing became easier. Working became easier. Thinking became easier. Not because the work changed, but because my mind did. It wasn't scattered anymore. It wasn't reacting anymore. It was directed. And that changes everything. Because when your attention is fully yours, your progress becomes inevitable. Not fast, not perfect, but consistent. And consistency is what creates real results. That's what I started to see. Not overnight, not dramatically, but clearly. I was moving forward again, not because I found a better strategy, but because I removed what was holding me back. And that's when I realized something I wish I understood earlier. You don't need to do more. You need to subtract. Subtract distraction. Subtract comparison. Subtract everything that pulls you away from yourself. Because what's left is enough. More than enough. And once you experience that, you don't want to go back. Not to the noise, not to the comparison. Because now you've seen the difference. You've felt the clarity. You've experienced what it's like to actually live your own life, not observe someone else's. And that changes the way you see everything. So if you're waiting for the right time to take control back, this is it. Not tomorrow, not next week. Now. You don't have to disappear completely. You don't have to cut everything off. Just start small. Create space, even a little, because that space is where everything begins. And once you step into it, you'll realize something simple. You were never lost. You were just surrounded by too many things that weren't yours. Chapter 6. Focus changed everything. Once the noise was gone, I expected something dramatic. A sudden burst of motivation. A clear, perfect plan. Something that felt like a breakthrough. But that's not what happened. What happened was quieter, simpler, more powerful. I started focusing. Not in a forced way. Not in a grind-harder way. Just naturally. Because for the first time in a long time, there was nothing pulling my attention away. No constant updates. No comparison. No mental interruptions every few minutes. Just one thing in front of me. And me. That's it. And in that simplicity, everything changed. Before this, focus felt difficult. Like something I had to fight for. I would sit down to work. And within minutes, my mind would drift. Not because I lacked discipline, but because my attention was already fragmented. Split between my work and everything I had seen earlier. All the comparisons, all the thoughts, all the distractions. So even when I tried to focus, part of my mind was somewhere else. But now, that part was gone, or at least quieter. And when your mind is quiet, focus becomes natural, not forced. That's when I realized something important. Focus is not something you create. It's something that remains when distraction is removed. And most people never experience that, because they're constantly adding more input, while wondering why they can't concentrate. But the problem isn't concentration, it's interference. Once the interference is gone, focus shows up on its own. And when it does, your output changes, not instantly, but noticeably. I started working longer without feeling drained. I started finishing things I used to delay. I started making progress that felt real, not rushed, not reactive, just steady. And that kind of progress is different because it builds momentum, not pressure. Momentum, the kind that makes the next step easier, the kind that keeps you moving, even when you don't feel motivated. That's when I understood something deeper. The problem was never time. I always had enough time. The problem was attention, because time without attention is wasted. You can spend hours doing something and still feel like you did nothing. But when your attention is fully there, even a short period becomes powerful. 1 hour of real focus is worth more than 5 hours of distraction. And once you experience that difference, you can't ignore it. Because now you see the truth. You don't need more hours. You need more presence. And presence only comes when your attention is not being pulled in different directions. That's why removing comparison mattered so much. Because comparison destroys presence. It keeps your mind elsewhere, always thinking about someone else, always measuring, always reacting. And when your mind is constantly reacting, you can't create, you can't build, you can't move forward with clarity. But when that stops, creation begins, real work begins. And that's what changed everything for me. Not motivation, not inspiration, focus. Simple, quiet, consistent focus, day after day. And the results followed, not instantly, but inevitably. Because when you show up consistently, with full attention, progress becomes unavoidable. You get better, you learn faster, you see things more clearly, and most importantly, you trust yourself more. Because now, you're not just thinking about doing things, you're actually doing them. And that builds something powerful. Self-respect, the kind that doesn't come from validation, the kind that comes from action, from showing up, even when no one is watching, from doing the work, even when it's not exciting, from staying focused, even when it's hard. And that kind of self-respect changes how you see yourself. You stop feeling behind, you stop feeling lost, because now you're moving, not based on someone else's timeline, but your own. And that's when comparison loses its grip completely, because you're too focused to care, too engaged in your own process, to constantly look at someone else's. That's the shift. You don't fight comparison forever. You outgrow it, through focus, through progress, through building something that matters to you. So if you're still struggling to focus, don't ask yourself, how do I concentrate more? Ask yourself, what is taking my attention away? Because that's where the real problem is. And once you remove that, focus becomes simple, not easy, but simple. One task, one direction, one step at a time. And if you can do that consistently, your life will change, not because you found a secret, but because you finally gave your attention to the only place that matters, your own path. And once that happens, everything else starts to fall into place. Chapter 7. I stopped competing with others. At some point, something shifts, not suddenly, not dramatically, but quietly. You stop looking around, not because you force yourself to, but because you don't feel the need to anymore. That's where I found myself. After removing the noise, after rebuilding my focus, there was less urgency to check what others were doing, less curiosity, less comparison, not because other people disappeared, but because my attention had somewhere better to go. Back to me, back to my work, back to my progress. And that's when a new question started to replace the old one. Before, I used to ask, am I ahead of them? Am I behind them? Now, I started asking something different. Am I better than I was yesterday? That question changed everything, because for the first time, I wasn't measuring myself against something external. I was measuring myself against my own past, and that shift gave me control back. Because when you compete with others, you're playing a game you don't control. Different starting points, different resources, different timing. You're comparing things that were never meant to be compared, and no matter how hard you try, you will always feel uncertain, always feel like you're not enough in some way. But when you compete with yourself, the rules change. Now it's simple. Did you improve? Did you show up? Did you move forward? That's it. No noise, no distortion, just truth. And the beauty of that is that progress becomes visible again. You start noticing small wins, things you would have ignored before, like focusing longer than yesterday, finishing something you used to delay, staying consistent when you would have quit. And those small wins build something powerful. Momentum. Not the kind that comes from hype, but the kind that comes from consistency. And consistency is what most people never reach, because they're too busy comparing, too busy measuring themselves against people they don't understand, too busy chasing a version of success that was never theirs. But when you shift inward, you simplify everything. You stop asking, what are they doing? And you start asking, what can I do better today? That question is actionable. It leads somewhere. It gives you direction, and direction is more important than speed, because speed without direction leads nowhere. But direction, even slow direction, leads somewhere real. That's what I started to experience, not fast success, not instant results, but steady movement, forward, every day, a little better, every day, a little clearer, every day, a little more aligned. And over time, that compounds, in a way that comparison never could, because comparison interrupts progress, but self-competition builds it, quietly, consistently. I remember noticing something strange. I stopped feeling rushed, not because I had more time, but because I wasn't trying to catch up anymore. There was no one to catch, no invisible race, just my path, and my responsibility to walk it. That feeling is freedom, not the kind that comes from having everything, but the kind that comes from not needing to be anyone else. And once you feel that, you don't want to go back, because now your energy is no longer wasted on measuring yourself. It's invested in building yourself, and that's a completely different experience. You become more present, more focused, more consistent, because your attention is no longer divided, it's directed. And when your attention is directed, your life becomes intentional, not reactive, not scattered. Intentional. That's when real growth begins. Not when you're inspired, not when you're motivated, but when you're aligned with your own standards, your own pace, your own direction. And those standards matter more than anything external, because they define how you live, not how others see you, but how you show up when no one is watching. That's where self-respect is built. That's where confidence grows. Not from comparison, but from consistency. From doing what you said you would do. From improving, even when it's small. From staying committed, even when it's hard. And the more you do that, the less you care about anyone else's path. Not in a negative way, not in a judgmental way, just neutral. Because you're occupied, engaged, focused. And when you're fully engaged in your own life, comparison has no space to exist. That's the shift. Not forcing yourself to stop comparing, but becoming someone who doesn't need to, because you're too busy becoming better, better than yesterday, better than your past self, better in a way that actually matters to you. So if you feel stuck, stop looking around. Stop measuring yourself against people you don't fully understand. And ask yourself something simple. What is one thing I can do today to become slightly better than I was yesterday? That's it. Not perfect, not dramatic, just better. Because if you do that consistently, you won't just improve, you'll transform, and you won't even notice when it happens, because you'll be too focused on moving forward. Chapter 8. The habit that gave me my life back at the beginning. It felt like I was giving something up. Less scrolling, less checking, less awareness of what everyone else was doing. It felt like loss, like I was disconnecting from the world, like I was missing something important. But over time, I realized something unexpected. I wasn't losing anything. I was getting my life back, because what I thought was connection before was actually distraction. What I thought was awareness was actually noise. And what I thought was motivation was actually pressure. And once all of that was gone, what remained was something simple. Peace, not excitement, not constant stimulation, just peace. And in that peace, I started to see things clearly. Not just my goals, not just my direction, myself, without comparison, without distortion, without the constant need to measure, just me, as I am. And for the first time, that felt enough. Not perfect, but enough to build on, enough to move forward, enough to trust. That's what the habit of non-comparison gives you. Not superiority, not confidence from being better than others, but stability, the kind that doesn't shake every time you see someone else succeed, because now, their success doesn't define you, it doesn't threaten you, it doesn't pull you away from your path. It just exists, and you stay where you are, focused, grounded. That's a completely different way of living, because most people are constantly reacting to what they see, reacting to what others achieve, reacting to how they compare. But when you remove comparison, you stop reacting, and you start acting from your own values, your own priorities, your own direction. That's where real power is. Not in controlling others, not in being ahead, but in being unaffected. Because when you're unaffected, you're free. Free to focus, free to build, free to move at your own pace. And that freedom is rare. Most people never experience it because they're constantly tied to external validation, to external measurement, to external standards. But once you break that, everything changes. Your mind becomes quieter, your actions become clearer, your progress becomes consistent, not because life gets easier, but because you stop making it harder. That's what comparison does. It complicates everything. It adds pressure where there doesn't need to be pressure. It creates doubt where there doesn't need to be doubt. And when you remove it, you simplify your life to something that actually works. So how do you build this habit? Not by trying to never compare again. That doesn't work. Comparison is automatic. It will still happen. The difference is what you do when it happens. That's where the habit is built. 3 simple steps. Notice. Pause. Redirect. First, notice it. Catch yourself in the moment. Don't ignore it. Don't pretend it's not happening. Just see it. I'm comparing right now. That awareness alone breaks the pattern. Second, pause. Don't react immediately. Don't go deeper into the thought. Just stop. Give yourself a second. Create space between the trigger and your response. That space is power, because in that space, you're no longer automatic, you're intentional. And third, redirect. Bring your attention back. Not to them, to you, to your work, to your next step, to what actually matters in your life. That's it. Simple. Not easy at first, but simple. And the more you practice it, the easier it becomes. Because every time you redirect your attention, you strengthen a new pattern, a pattern of focus, a pattern of control, a pattern of self-direction. And over time, that becomes your default, You don't automatically compare anymore. You automatically return to yourself. And that's when everything shifts. Because now, your energy is no longer scattered. It's concentrated. Your mind is no longer reactive. It's deliberate, and your life is no longer influenced by everyone else. It's shaped by you. That's the real transformation. Not becoming someone else, not reaching some external standard, but becoming fully aligned with your own path. And once you reach that point, you realize something simple. You are never behind. You are never lacking. You were just distracted by lives that weren't yours, timelines that weren't yours, standards that weren't yours. And the moment you let all of that go, you return to something real. Your life, your direction, your potential. And from that place, growth becomes natural. Not forced, not pressured, just consistent. Because now, you're finally building something that belongs to you, and that's all you ever needed. Take a moment and just sit with this. Not the words, not the ideas, but the realization. You've been measuring your life against people who were never meant to be your standard. You've been looking sideways when your life was always meant to move forward, and the cost of that was never obvious. It didn't look like failure. It looked like hesitation, like doubt, like constantly feeling like you weren't enough. But now you see it. And once you see it, you can't go back to not knowing. You can't unknow the fact that comparison was never helping you. It was just distracting you, pulling your attention away from the only place it ever needed to be. Your own life, your own path, your own potential. And that's where everything changes. Not when you become more talented, or not when you become more motivated, but when you become more focused. Focused on what actually matters. Not what looks impressive, not what gets attention, but what moves you forward. Because at the end of the day, your life is not a competition. It never was. There is no universal timeline, no fixed pace you're supposed to follow. There is only your path, and your responsibility to walk it. That's it. And the moment you accept that, pressure disappears. Not completely, but enough for clarity to take its place. Because now, you're not trying to catch up anymore. You're trying to become. And those are two completely different things. One is driven by fear. The other is driven by direction. So from this moment on, make a decision, not a temporary one, a real one. You stop measuring your life against people you don't fully understand. You stop giving your attention to things that don't serve your growth. You stop building your identity based on what you see around you. And instead, you bring everything back to yourself. Your actions, your standards, your focus. Because that's where your power is. Not out there, in here, in what you choose to do, with the time and attention you have. And if you can protect that, everything else will follow, not instantly, but inevitably, because consistency always beats comparison. Focus always beats distraction, and clarity always beats noise. So here's something simple you can start with. For the next 72 hours, don't compare, not once. And if it happens, catch it, pause, and bring your attention back. That's it. No pressure to be perfect. Just awareness. Because that awareness is the beginning of control. And control is the beginning of change. You don't need to become someone else. You don't need to catch up to anyone. You don't need to prove anything. You just need to stop looking at everyone else and start building yourself, because everything you've been looking for was never out there. It was always here, waiting for your attention. So stop comparing and start becoming. Because the moment you do, you don't just change your habits, you change your life. And if you stay with this long enough, something even deeper begins to happen. You stop needing constant reassurance. You stop needing to check if you're on the right track based on what other people are doing. Because now, you feel it. You feel when you're aligned. You feel when you're moving forward, not because someone told you, but because your actions match your direction. And that kind of certainty doesn't come from comparison. It comes from consistency, from showing up for yourself over and over again. Even when it's quiet, even when no one notices, even when there's no immediate result. Because at that point, you're no longer driven by what you see. You're driven by who you are becoming. And that shift is everything. Because now, you don't need to look around anymore. Not for validation, not for confirmation, not for direction. You become your own reference point, your own standard, your own source of truth. And when that happens, life becomes simpler, not easier, but clearer. You wake up knowing what matters. You move through your day with intention. You end your day knowing you showed up. That's enough. More than enough. Because that's how real confidence is built. Not from being better than others, but from being consistent with yourself. From knowing that no matter what happens around you, you will keep moving forward. That you won't get pulled back into noise. That you won't lose yourself again. And that kind of trust is unshakable. So if there's one thing to take with you after this, let it be this. You don't need to speed up your life. You need to stop interrupting it. Stop breaking your focus. Stop questioning your path. Stop comparing your progress. Because your life is already moving, already unfolding, already becoming something. And the only thing that was slowing it down was your attention being somewhere else. So bring it back, again and again, every day. Not perfectly, but intentionally, because every time you do that, you reinforce something powerful, that your life matters, that your path is enough, that your progress is real. And the more you reinforce that, the less anything outside of you can shake it. That's the freedom you've been looking for. Not freedom from work, not freedom from effort, but freedom from distraction, freedom from comparison, freedom from constantly feeling like you're not enough. And once you have that, you don't just move forward, you move forward with clarity, with purpose, with control. And that's when you finally realize you were never chasing success. You were chasing peace. And now, you know exactly where to find it. And if you stay with this long enough, something even deeper begins to happen. You stop needing constant reassurance. You stop needing to check if you're on the right track based on what other people are doing. Because now, you feel it. You feel when you're aligned. You feel when you're moving forward, not because someone told you, but because your actions match your direction. And that kind of certainty doesn't come from comparison. It comes from consistency, from showing up for yourself over and over again, even when it's quiet, even when no one notices, even when there's no immediate result, because at that point, you're no longer driven by what you see. You're driven by who you are becoming, and that shift is everything. Because now, you don't need to look around anymore. Not for validation, not for confirmation, not for direction. You become your own reference point, your own standard, your own source of truth. And when that happens, life becomes simpler, not easier, but clearer. You wake up knowing what matters. You move through your day with intention. You end your day knowing you showed up. And that's enough. More than enough. Because that's how real confidence is built. Not from being better than others, but from being consistent with yourself. From knowing that no matter what happens around you, you will keep moving forward, that you won't get pulled back into noise, that you won't lose yourself again. And that kind of trust is unshakable. So if there's one thing to take with you after this, let it be this. You don't need to speed up your life. You need to stop interrupting it. Stop breaking your focus. Stop questioning your path. Stop comparing your progress, because your life is already moving, already unfolding, already becoming something. And the only thing that was slowing it down was your attention being somewhere else. So bring it back, again and again, every day, not perfectly, but intentionally. Because every time you do that, you reinforce something powerful. That your life matters. That your path is enough. That your progress is real. And the more you reinforce that, the less anything outside of you can shake it. That's the freedom you've been looking for. Not freedom from work. Not freedom from effort. But freedom from distraction. Freedom from comparison. Freedom from constantly feeling like you're not enough. And once you have that, you don't just move forward. You move forward with clarity, with purpose, with control. And that's when you finally realize you were never chasing success. You were chasing peace. And now you know exactly where to find it.